Palmer Sinclair sat at her small table and looked out the grand picture window at the San Bruno mountainside. She saw a black-tailed doe and her fawn, grazing on what little shrubbery the mountainside had to offer, and watched as the doe nudged her baby, guiding it to a food source. The sight of a mother caring for her child brought Palmer back to the DNA instructions and test that sat in front of her. Today was the day. Her self-imposed deadline to finally spit in the tube and send it off. Deep in her heart, she knew she had family out there and desperately wanted to connect with someone. She hoped she had a sibling, but would welcome an aunt or uncle, or even a cousin, distant or closely related. Someone who could teach her and help her learn about her family, her heritage, and where she came from. Mostly, she wanted to know how or why she'd ended up in the orphanage so many years ago. Palmer read the instructions aloud, picked up the vial, and began to fill it. Once she'd gone over the designated line, she added the stabilization buffer and secured the cap. She pulled out the form and printed her name. Palmer Sinclair wasn't her birth name, or the name she'd used at the orphanage. The second thing she'd done after turning 18 was to change her name. The first was to ask for her records. She also didn't know her birth date. The date on her file was the date she arrived. Why the orphanage never asked for her birth certificate still confused Palmer to this day. It was as if no one wanted her to know she existed. She'd made up everything herself, which made her feel like a fake. She didn't care what her driver's license and social security card said her name was. It wasn't her. With the package sealed, Palmer set it by her front door and made her way into her kitchen to brew a much-needed pot of coffee. She ran on caffeine. It was her lifeline. While the aroma of coffee beans began to fill the air around her, Palmer thought about the box that sat by the door and how she had put the test off for what felt like eons, and how well her life had turned out despite the odds being stacked against her. All her life, Palmer had been alone. She'd never had someone in the corner rooting her on, or a mother at home to make sure her homework was done, to kiss her scraped knee or braid her hair. She didn't have a father to teach her about cars or sports, or hold her when she experienced her first heartbreak. Growing up, any friendship she'd had never lasted long. It was an inevitable end. Either her friends went back to their homes, or they went to another house. School friends were impossible. Telling the other kids she lived in a group home was never fun. According to what little paperwork she had about herself, she was about 3 years old when she arrived at the orphanage. She was sure of that, at least in her mind, because of a reoccurring dream she had of a woman in a brown dress holding her hand. The issue with the dream was she didn't know if what she remembered happened before or after she arrived. Back then, record-keeping wasn't the best, and if someone had information about her, it had never made it into her file.